Kahlil, welcome to Thinking Class. I've been really looking forward to our conversation. Feels like it's been a long time coming.
Thank you, John, for having me. Looking forward to this.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Well, this is the first time we've met. I came across you through Substack, and I first became aware of you and your work through Luke Burgess, who clearly we both have a shared interest in. And Luke Burgess, for the listeners, is an interesting person. He had spent time on Wall Street. He'd been an entrepreneur, felt his life was empty, ended up studying theology and philosophy over in Rome, and nearly joined the Catholic seminary to become a priest. And in that time, he was taught by Rene Girard. He became a disciple of him, I suppose, is probably the right words, because of Girard's way of understanding the world's human desire. And I became aware of Luke Burgess through Rene Girard. He's someone who makes his thoughts much more accessible to the simple person like me. So it's really great to have you. And before we get into your work and how you've been influenced by Burgess and Girard, it'd be great to hear some things about you, Kahlil. So tell us about who you are and what you do and how you came to be sitting in front of me.
All right. Thank you, John. Our connection is Burgess and Girard because, and I've been thinking about like how I should introduce myself. And then since this is a podcast entitled like, what's the name of your podcast again? The Thinking Class.
Thinking
Class. Okay. So, like, how would I introduce myself? The Thinking Class, because I've also been involved in so many things that, like, I just recently promoted myself in LinkedIn. I gave myself a new title, which is Gentleman Scholar.
I saw that.
And I think that sort of captures, I guess, what I'm doing now. And since we're going to talk about like my essay in Luke's Substack, that was a guest post, I think that would be a good, model for talking about like my background, because like there are a different shape between work and jobs. So I feel my work is actually like seeking and speaking truth. That's like something I've been trying to figure out for many years, and I think that's gonna be my work. While job, so in that article, I define job as a kind of work which pays the bills, which allows you to participate in the free market. And my job in the past 10 years has been entrepreneurship. I run a company, but that's really like, once that gets solved, like I was like, so what do I do now? Like, do I keep on just growing this thing? And the answer I found, and which is sort of ties with what you wanted to discuss, which are the books, The Pathless Path and The Good Enough Job, is that, when I read those, like, I went through this as well. And then I sought that like meaning in my work as well. And now I'm here. Like, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Figuring out truth and sharing that mainly through writing. So I think that would be the background. We could go into like the Rene Girard, which is my latest obsession. After also reading Luke's book, One Thing.
Yeah. Well, I really like that's become a mission of yours, to try to articulate truth, to seek it and to speak it at work. This is something that I've struggled with, I think, a lot over the years. Is you worry about the judgment of men and women in some respects, where you constrain what it is you're saying so as not to be too forthright, to not try and say things as they are, or even to touch on really weighty deep matters, which is obviously a really important thing to do because we're human and we're ultimately spiritual creatures, whether we think we are or not. Now, obviously, I'm British, so therefore, me worrying about how I might be perceived is probably part of being British. You know, we're very polite. We kind of beat around the bush. But one thing that was really noticeable in my psychological makeup, as it were, in those years where I struggled to express and to articulate the truth, is the sense of suffocation in some ways. Like there's a weighing down. You feel as though you're not living right, I suppose, and it weighs on your conscience. So you know, you still have to step up. We have to wake up every day and figure out how it is that you're going to live properly, truthfully. But I think once you have that realization and you start to try to live that, it frees you. And it's really surprising how many people you break down those barriers with when everyone else is playing the same square dance of, you know, that constrained speech and not quite saying how they feel and think. The moment someone starts to do that, other people pile in and you can have a really meaningful shared experience together. So that was a really lovely way of opening, Kahlil.
Yep. And like going deeper into that thought, like that hesitation of speaking truth. I mean, it's also a habit that it's like a muscle. It seems, no, that needs to be strengthened because there's always like resistance. Because like in the latest series I wrote related to Girard, I connected his ideas to this extremely online thinker named Venkatesh Rao, who has this like model of like three archetypes in the office, which is like, you know, the loser, the sociopath, and the clueless. But with the help of Girard, you know, I was able to like see the sleight of hand there. It's like it views like all these perspectives from the point of view of power. Like the sociopath plays power, the loser doesn't have power, and the clueless doesn't see the power game. But if you give them, if you provide a perspective from their own point of view, it's essentially like you have like the new archetypes they came up with was the king playing the power game, but it could be positive. You have the citizen, you know, preserving the peace and harmony of society, and you have the philosopher speaking truth. So those are like three epistemologies. Like people view the world and create their playbook for operating the world with the three kinds of epistemologies, or like roughly speaking. I mean, each one of us has like all those three parts, and you know, to speak truth, I realized that the what you call this the hesitation of possibly producing some conflict. You know, you have to get used to that. And you know, it's like you mentioned you're British, but I'm Asian, and we're also very conflict averse. So you have to like I had to learn to be the weird guy, not to be able to do my work. But at the same time, writing that series called Triangulations, I realized that there's also wisdom from this perspective of keeping the peace and taboos and rituals. I mean, there's a embedded wisdom. They're taboos. They are rituals because they kept the peace for, you know, generations. So anyhow, we could go deeper into that.
I like that. I like the wisdom in the taboos and the rituals point. And it's something that you can feel within your culture. And it's interesting that when someone who hasn't been born and raised in that culture can come in and go, whoa, this is all a bit weird. I just wish you as a British person would just speak openly, stop dancing around the subject, be really direct. And, you know, if you're a British person, you to go somewhere else, you'd be going, what's going on here? I don't really understand this way of interacting. But you're absolutely right. There's an element of keeping the peace. And it's one thing that I came to notice, actually working with people, you know, when you're plugged into somewhere like London and you're working with people all over the world, some people say, do you know what, we really like the British way of doing things. It's very collegiate. And others will go, do you know what, I just hate how indirect it is. But, you know, it's only when you start to, and I know you think quite deeply about your own country's history, but it's only when you start to go back in time through the history and you realize, you know, all of the conflict that took place to even get to the point of having that kind of peace, and thus all the norms that would have had to have developed to keep it together over time, that you start to go, maybe that's why those people are like that. And I can see that it serves a purpose. But if you try and cut yourself off from history, you can't ever understand the present. And so I think that's an interesting point. Tell us about Girard's work. What is it that he's known for, and what is it that drew you to him? You said it became an obsession of yours. What was that? What was that moment?
Well, it was Luke Burgess's book, actually. Looking back, maybe in the past, maybe 5 to 10 years, it has been the most impactful book I've read. Mainly because it unveiled a very, very powerful force in my life. Before, it was invisible to me, which is this nomadic desire. So when I was in my teens, I learned about practical virtue ethics, essentially like developing good habits, and growing as your character through like repetition. I mean, like, when Atomic Habits came out, it's like, this is like what I learned back in my teens from church. Like, I was like, this is how to become a good person. So one aspect of growing in virtue is mastering one's animal desires. Classically, this has been termed the virtue of temperance. And so that's one kind of desire to overcome and to be free from. And then, but then I was still trapped within certain kinds of desires. They were not like the classical animal desires that you could expect from the opposite, the vices, which is the opposite of the virtue of temperance. And for instance, I spent so many years like pursuing, my career as an entrepreneur, I feel, is a result of nomadic desire. It's been helpful. I mean, like I went through a lot of battles. It's like I was ambitious. I worked so hard to build a business, and then I wanted more. Like I just wanted it to be huge and to be successful. But then when I read this book, it just laid bare that source. Like, why do I want this? And it became so clear. It's like I grew up in this environment. The entrepreneurs were heroes. My friends are all entrepreneurs. I'm playing in this game. Like I want to look good amongst my buddies. They desire the same things. So it just made so much sense. And then Luke talks about this thin desires and thick desires. And well, it was also a privilege because of the result of that pursuing the desire and being fueled by the desire to have some like leeway in business. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's like, will I just continue doing this? Like, what am I supposed to do with my life? And I guess a lot of like just reflection and discernment. It's like I think what I'm supposed to be doing is what I mentioned to you, like seeking truth and speaking truth, and that's the impact that book had on me. So that's why I need to know more about Rene Girard. So that's one of his key ideas, mimetic desire. The other one is actually what we like comes from the logic that which we explored earlier, that societies in anthropology. I just started my master's in anthropology actually,
Oh, wow.
and then yeah, there's this concept of cultural universals. Like these things just appear in all cultures, like marriage, like sacrifice, like taboos. Um, but the question is like, how come all cultures have a ritual sacrifice as a cultural norm? Like people do it. Like why is it there? And Rene Girard's answer follows that logic we talked about earlier because, in some way, sacrifice preserves the peace of societies. And based on observing like different societies and myths, and also like recent history, like persecutions, he came up with the scapegoat mechanism, and it's just a fascinating model of understanding how conflict arises and how you can operate in the world. It's like, and also mastering your own self, because it's embedded in us to the tendency to scapegoat people. So that's another fascinating thing on the outside of the mimetic desire, which was my introduction to the ideas of Rene Girard.
Yeah, that is one of those unveiling moments. You're totally right. I remember reading Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World by Girard, and I'd come across him. Well, this is a great example of mimetic desire, actually. The idea of wanting what other people want is I came across that book by watching a talk with Roger Scruton, who I think is a great English philosopher. And he said, Rene Girard, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World, it's really important. And he gave a tiny bit, and I thought, straight on Amazon, ordering the book because Scruton said so, which is really interesting in itself. And I didn't know what I was getting in for. That within the first few pages, I'd realized the reason why I did that. But I suppose the good thing, and you touched on it about this thin desires, thick desires, is there are some things that if you are to want them, if you are going to want the same things as other people, then make it something lasting and deep, and that creates connection and, makes you develop character, I suppose. And so, I suppose going off and buying a book because a philosopher said so, ultimately that's ordered toward the good, right? You're trying to find out something that might help you live a more fully human life and be better around other people. But that unveiling moment within those first few pages of seeing that, I think it's something like mimicry is the cornerstone of all culture. And you realize
And also,
that it's all about human imitation. And as soon as you take away imitation and mimicry, there is no culture. And then I started to look at the world and go, look at how things have changed so much. Look what everyone values now, and look at all of the pressures on us and the things that are mechanized and trying to grab our attention that are making us want certain things, and our attention so dissipated we almost can't pick through it. What's the important stuff? And so we've moved away from, points in history where the kind of the virtue development, the character development, the idea of rituals and traditions has kind of been pushed to the side. And so you've got these artifacts left over in cities like these wonderful, in Europe, these beautiful cathedrals and churches, which are from a time which, they valued other things other than utility and productivity. And then you can see everything that came after that point when productivity became the thing, and we began to see everything as a mechanic process. So yeah, that unveiling is definitely what it feels like when you read Girard or Burgess. You go, huh, I can now see the world as it is, and me. It's unsettling.
Yep. And I guess that would be a good segue to like the three-sided problem, which you mentioned you want to talk about, because in the past you mentioned that like the worldview was like is reflected in these like works of like works of art, which was like I guess a product of hundreds of years and thousands of people's work, and like it's like could that happen now? Like is there even desire to do that? So I mean that was really I guess Luke's um, um, unveiling as well. That with so I mean for the listener, so we're talking about this other work of Luke Burgess, was an article in Wired magazine called "The Three-Sided Problem of Modern Life." Essentially, Luke was saying, like today we view things, our values, and our um, uh, the way we judge the world and people is based on utility, which he calls Silicon Valley. But there are other ways of viewing the world, which are first Athens, which is like philosophy, and also Jerusalem, which is the perspective of religion. So I guess the point of Luke there is like we are blind if we are just using one perspective to view the world. So I found it very helpful in that question of like meaningless work. Now, because like I read those two books, The Pathless Path by Paul Miller, and The Good of Job um, by Simon Stoltoff. I hope I'm pronouncing his family correctly. So when I read that, it's like, I mean, is it this guy's captures a real problem? It's like, I mean, I experienced this, and a lot of people have been talking about this, and you could see it in the comments of their book reviews that this is a real problem. People are working, and it's a lot of times it's meaningless. So, but I was dissatisfied by their solutions. Like now that we know this, there's like we're trapped in work that is meaningless. So what now? So I Luke's three-sided perspective, I felt was like a pathway out of that, because the solutions of Paul and Simon were really just like, okay, just care less about your job. So like, don't make it like the centerpiece of your life or something like that. But if we open up our perspectives using Athens and using Jerusalem, we could actually get like some wisdom from like centuries past. I mean, people have been thinking about this thing for ages. I mean, we're not unique in this problem. Like for instance, this like Athens. I mean, we have that old model of like the true, the good, and the beautiful. Yeah? So I mean, if you imagine like all the kinds of works, and we could just sort of like divide it into the true, the good, and the beautiful. So those are the different um, endeavors that we could pursue. We could create good things, we could create beautiful things, create true things. But then when we talk about jobs, they're really just a small segment of those different endeavors, the true, the good, and beautiful. So meaning, as I mentioned earlier, like work is a much bigger phenomenon, much bigger thing than jobs. So, I mean, so Silicon Valley, sort of the lie that Silicon Valley has been telling is that the only this small thing that's work, but the rest is like, like what are those like this door? Those are meaningless. So, but using that perspective, you can already see like, hey, this is not the job is not the thing. Like there are so many other kinds of work that may not fit this modern perspective of Silicon Valley, of technology and capitalism. Um, However good they are, I mean, the world of work is much bigger. So that's one. Like meaning, like the what you call this, this defining work as something which is not limited by value as defined by that free enterprise. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. It's like this is sort of my religion, but the work is much bigger than that. And so that's one. And also, I mean, I also explore the perspective of Jerusalem, particularly the Christian um, view of work. That because one, this actually Paul mentions this. Both Paul, I think, and Simone mentioned this part of the of Genesis that like as a consequence of sin, God punished man to what's the frame what's the phrase like to they would that you would work by the sweat of your brow or something like you have to
Yes, you'd earn your bread by the sweat of your brow.
yeah so that one they mentioned that so as if work was a punishment for sin. But I mean, I came across in my teens. Um, um, I came across this um, priest named Samuel Esteva, who was preaching about about work, the meaning of work, and he points out that actually if you read Genesis, that is actually God told Adam and Eve to already work before the sin happened. Which is like God asked them to take care to be stewards of the Garden of Eden. Meaning they were in charge. They were supposed to, they were in charge of upkeep of the Garden of Eden. It's like that's basically work. We are. This world is entrusted to us. No? So it is I guess the consequences of sin is the tiredness, I suppose. But it's not the work in itself is not the punishment. It is actually a gift. Like this is a great thing. Like we could create beautiful things, create good things. We could know truth through our work. It's like it's a great thing in this world. So those were some of the ideas. There's some more there in that article, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. That when I read those books, like, I have to comment on this. So that essay was my response to those books.
That's a much more succinct way of putting the three city problem than I would have done. I would have been talking for the next hour trying to pull that apart. So well done. I think it's quite fascinating once you do start to look through that model, just how stripped bare working life can be when you realize that it is all focused on what we can produce and how useful something is, and that everything around trying to, inculcate a graduate or someone new into the job, it always becomes about a value is attached to, the thing that you end up producing or the concept that you come up with. And because we've spoken in the language of utility and productivity for so long, and we've lost a sense of those worldviews, ways of seeing and being that can be found in Athens and Jerusalem, which is, what is man and what is he to become in this life? what is the unique responsibility of each one of us for ourselves and everything else in creation, however you want to term that, whether you're religious or not. And I think you're right. I don't think it is possible to do good work without having some sense of what what those cities are about. Because if it all just becomes about data and some kind of process-driven technological approach, all you end up left with here is numbers on a spreadsheet and graphs and data and information. Everyone wants data and information, but no one actually knows what to do with them when they get it. Like, that isn't the same as wisdom. It isn't the same as going, so what does this tell you about everything and what you ought to do in the next moment? And if you remove the what ought you do and all of that stuff that we've, as you've mentioned, tapped into, I don't know, all of human history, and then learns to document it a few thousand years ago, which is, these are all the ways in which we can go wrong. These are all the ways in which we can cause harm to ourselves and to others. These are all the ways in which we diminish ourselves if we only look in this way, if we only care about the world in this way, as in what it can do for us. And I would love to see, and I don't know, I feel like maybe there is a bit of a dial shifting. Insofar as people are asking these questions, I think you're seeing a bit of a shift towards people trying to grab onto something. And I'll share a personal story, and it wasn't just driven through work. I remember when the pandemic hit. So my background, I grew up in a godless household. I was very staunchly atheist, a real disciple of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. I basically began to view the world in their fundamental atheist way, which is to say that they only ever criticized, at least at that point in time, the Christian worldview based on a fundamental literal reading of the Bible, which wasn't how it was ever really understood pre-Reformation. It was more about symbols and metaphor and a conception that there's something beyond us. It's not just whatever's written here is the literal truth. So anyway, I did all of that dismissal, and I'd left school early, 17, didn't go to university. It wasn't until later in life that I thought, oh God, I'm missing something here. I need to do something that isn't just work, something for its own sake. So I ended up studying, and within that there was some philosophy embedded in it, and then I went on to do a master's in ethics. But in that time, something happened where obviously I've been opened up to other ways of seeing. And in the pandemic, when it came along, we're all in our homes, and you're cracking open your work laptop and you're doing your tasks and you're sending things off, and you realize how denuded your existence is when you don't have anything going on in those worlds of Athens and Jerusalem, and that there's something yearning in you. It's like there's this big groan within you that you must go and deal with. And I found myself being drawn to all of the things that Jerusalem have produced over the years, whether it be the churches in the little town that I was living in at the time, whether it was, why is it that we have this culture here in, Europe in this case? And where did that come from? Why have we got ruined monasteries all over Britain? And it wasn't until I ended up looking through that portal, when I stopped thinking about things that were useful and what I ought to be doing next, what's the next thing on the to-do list, that all of a sudden these were probably your words actually in your Substack, which was, when you look into Jerusalem, when you go to spend any time there, it's the port city to eternity, and it's in that moment that you start to realize that's the transcendental yearning that we've all got as humans. And ever since that moment, and it became a series of moments, and it ended up leading to ultimately a conversion, life becomes richer, and you start to be able to see what it is you ought to attend to, what it is that you need not. And it's a way of not objectifying everyone and everything, and including yourself in that. You value yourself and others much more deeply.
Definitely. I mean, If you just view the world through utility, I mean, you will end up like judging people based on their utility. But then, if we have other ways of like seeing value, that is, it's a, there's this was this recent exchange in Twitter where like I tried to explain prayer to a non-believer. How do you convince a non-believer that prayer could be good? Like, when we make decisions, we have like, we are actually using like a model of ourselves. Like, what would Kahlil or what would John do based on these things? But imagine if you have a model of a all-loving, all-wise being, and you try to do his will. That would probably end up with more loving and more wise outcomes. So, even if you're not a believer, maybe a prayer is a good thing. I mean, it worked for hundreds and thousands of years. Anyhow, I mean, like there's so much more. As you mentioned, there's like this things just open up once you remove those blinders. Like you go outside of Silicon Valley, you visit Athens, you visit Jerusalem, and you have like all this wisdom there. You just need to like exit this little town of Silicon Valley.
It's remarkable how many people out there in the popular culture have had those moments of dawning. We've talked about Luke, we've talked about ourselves, but obviously, there are other people who've gone on and done some very distinguished things. I mean, you think about someone like Ryan Holiday, who was a marketing executive, and totally taken with the wisdom of Athens and specifically Stoicism. And it just took his whole career off in a different direction. He went from writing books about good PR to writing books about discipline and getting on top of your ego and seeing every challenge and suffering as something that can expand you and your life and help you lead a richer one. And I find it interesting that the conversion can take place to any one of those cities or a combination of them. But it almost seems that as soon as people do open that door and they look into it, it takes them somewhere totally unexpected. But then they have this outsized influence on countless people because they've helped open the door as well. You mentioned, well, in fact, you seem to have conceptualized some really interesting things within your essays, Kahlil, and one of them that I really liked. So you talked about how what you were trying to do was not be taken with thin desires, things that are fleeting, that don't nourish you and your humanity and don't help you live a full life. So you start to set your life up around being able to achieve the kind of thicker desires we've just been speaking about, but also from a working perspective, you like the FIRE movement, the financially independent, retire early movement. And I'd be interested to hear how you design your environment to help you move towards that goal, that FIRE goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also in that essay, so I had this little graph, and then the pathway towards like financial independence or post economic independence is like the one is like to make a lot of money. So, and then the other one is like to become a monk. So those are two axes. So one is like to grow wealth. Second one is to master your desires. And so I've been like the FIRE movement has been interesting to me because of that. Although I'm not like I couldn't speak about it with some expertise because I don't think I really have practiced it. But I have some friends who like have been, their lives have been changed because of fire. And one, it's not only because of like the focus on financial education, like you know how to play with your money. It's because of, I think, minimalism as well. Some of them even say fire is minimalism, minimalism is fire. So there is that also like that aspect of, I guess, it's also part of Jerusalem. It's part of like Athens. Minimalism is like a, I guess, simplified version of like being detached, living simply, and all these virtues that we learn from Athens to Jerusalem. So um, that was what attracted me to fire. But and then so I guess my playbook there is to try to do both. Like as an entrepreneur, I mean, what you're doing is really just automating two things. One is the creation of value, and second is the acquisition of customers. That's basically, you're building a system that does that. You get customers and you create value for them by hiring people, by process, by technology. So that was my playbook for creating value. But you don't find a playbook for mastering desire from the world of entrepreneurship. So I find it somewhere else. So that was like, one was like this virtue ethics. It's classic. Second one is like, which my recent discovery is like mimetic desire. So the, what I learned in the past decades is really like um, designing your environment and your habits as well. So since we couldn't really remove mimetic desire, you have no choice. You will copy the desires of people around you. So what you could choose is to be around people whose desires you want to copy. So that's maybe the main thing. It's like, and it's not only like actual individuals or like people existing right here and now. It could be it could be books, it could be models that you follow online. So it's like you want to design the people whose desires you want to copy. And again, going back to those my experience of my own conversion in my teens, it's like I was just following. It's like this is how to be a good Christian, but now from the lens of mimetic theory, it's like you you read the Bible, you pray, all things. You're actually mimicking a model, which is Christ, or or if you're a Buddhist, you're following Buddha or whatever. It's like you have all these different models through these practices. You are desiring what they desire. So that's one. And then my daily practice is really just asking myself when I do my prayer. It's like, okay, today was the number one thing I should do for my loved ones. That's the right one thing. What's the number one thing I should be doing for my work? And what habit should I be working on today? So that's like the way I design my focus. Like today, this is focus. This is the focus. And then in terms of like like designing my environment to desire what I feel is my calling. It's like actually I stopped hanging out with entrepreneurs before. Like they were all like I was always with them, and they were my buddies. But luckily during the pandemic, like I moved to a new city, and since since I feel this is my calling to seek truth and speak truth, so I've just been surrounding myself with writers, people who, I mean, it's mostly in the internet, but it's like it's the same thing. I mean, I read their words, we exchange ideas, and they're becoming my models. So that's that's basically the whole thing. And then, like these in my church group, so we have this like regular retreats and recollections. So that helps me like zoom out and like see like how could I redesign my environment, my system, so that I am more exposed to the good, and like fix the problems there. So that's basically what's been working for me. I mean, I didn't know that these practices in my church group was like were that way, but now looking at it from like this productivity and at lifestyle design and memory desire perspectives, like oh, this is like this is why it works.
I really like your methods for orienting your life towards your desire. Although I don't think they're methods per se. It's not that you've sat there and tried to think about how you can leverage all of these wonderful ways in which to live the most flourishing life in a kind of business-like manner, if we just follow this plan. But I think it is important to be able to, as you say, either surround ourselves with the ideas of people if we can't surround ourselves with those people, and to actually consciously engage and orient ourselves towards those positive models. I don't know if you've heard of a thinker called Matthew Crawford. He's an American philosopher. Have you come across him before? Okay, so he wrote a book which I'm midway through reading at the moment. He's written a few books, but this one is called The World Beyond Your Head, and the subtitle is How to Flourish in an Age of Distraction. He's an interesting guy because he's called, how you get a philosopher king like Marcus Aurelius? Well, Matthew Crawford is a mechanic philosopher. So he used to do lots of corporate jobs, but he does lots of work with his hands. He has a workshop, and basically when he's not sitting there thinking about the world and what it means to be human, he's working on things. He's working with his hands. It's in those moments where you're out of your head that you can be more fully present, and you can hone a skill, and through that placing attention on things, it creates who you are. But it also, by attending to something properly, to give it its full attention, to try and bring something properly into being, is an act of co-creation. And anyway, in the beginning of this book, how some books, they come out hard with the blocks, and you're just constantly writing down notes like, whoa, this is something. Well, he was writing about how we ought to see attention like all of the marketers and advertisers and social media companies do, which is an attention as a resource. And they're all coming up with the means in which to grab your attention, to dissipate it. And obviously they have their interests in mind. And effectively what he's saying is, you need to go, what are your interests? You need to decide what it is that you ought to be focusing on. And you need to design your environment. You need to, what he called an ecology of attention. You need to strip away everything that's going to stop you from focusing on those things worth focusing on. And I'm sure all of us in the modern age can struggle with this, is even if you set up your room to make sure that your alarm's on the other side of the room, so when it goes off, you get out of bed, and then you've got to go and turn it off. It means once you're out of bed, you're not going to get back in. So that's good. And then when you go through to the living room to contemplate, to pray, whatever, you've got your book, your notepads there as well for afterwards. There's no phone in the room. There's nothing that's going to be able to take your attention away. But it's when you get on that laptop and, at work, you think, oh, I need to read this thing and I need to read that thing. Before you know it, you've got 40 tabs open on your internet browser. You're never going to get through them. But then throughout the course of the day, you'll go, right, I'm doing this thing. But then you'll see this tab open and you'll go, maybe I should go and open that, because that was interesting as well. And I should be doing that too. Before you know it, you've been dragged into this war of attrition with multitasking. And you basically, no one wins. You don't even produce the thing that you could have produced in no time at all if you'd somehow managed to design your, at least digital environment to shut everything else out. So I think that ecology of attention is a good mental model to have, really, is what could you do digitally? And once you close that laptop lid, which we definitely should all do, and make sure we have time and space to think and contemplate and focus and attend. But what can we do to strip away all of that stuff that's just going to come and grab our attention, but we're going to really get nothing from it, and neither are the people around us, because we haven't done anything truly meaningful.
Definitely. The model I've been using is like of the stallion and the rider. It turns out this is an ancient model. The Greeks seem to have used it. And what brought me to the model is actually this book called Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So he has like the system one and system two. System one being this, our way of thinking, which is fast, instinctive, and system two is the more deliberate and slow and rational type of thinking. So the way I think about this is that my system one is like a stallion. It is sub-rational. It's very easily influenced by all this these shiny new things, and as the rider has to put on some blinders so that you could get to where you're going. You have to sometimes pull the reins hard, so that you don't fall into the ditch. And you have to, it's the rider who knows the territory. And, that model has been helping me like also accept that there's a part of me which is I'm not fully in control of, or like it's not, I need to, as I mentioned, design this ecology of attention so that that stallion does not like go like where it's not like some dangerous areas. Like we have a mission here, so we're supposed to go somewhere. Sometimes as well, the other side there is that a lot of creative work requires the leadership of the stallion, or at least the instincts of the stallion. So I think part of the design is also like openness to inspiration. So the way I do it is like I try to make my calendar as free as possible, so I could say yes to serendipity when it comes up. So I have some slack both in time and money, so the ship is not to run too tightly, so that there's leeway for serendipity. So those are like the two sides there. One is like having the rider like see the map and direct the stallion. At the same time, trusting the instincts of the stallion, for which is required, I think, for creative work or even entrepreneurship. You're going into the unknown, and it's that that the instincts of the stallion which helps in like having a sense of where to go.
I like that. I like that. It shows the importance of trying to understand how it is that we work and what we're drawn to and the things that can take us off track. I think we're coming into the end zone, but I wondered two things. I think we'll start with the first question. We've talked loads about books and essays and things that have influenced us. What are you reading at the moment, Kahlil?
I'm reading David Deutsch, Beginning of Infinity, and actually mentioned some of it. What you call this in the latest set of essays I've been writing, essentially about small g. But the thing is, like, he's the key connection with Girard, I think, is that he sees the West as the beginning of infinity, this civilization which values truth and the institutions of like taking care of the weak and justice, versus like this is like you guys in the West have become blind to this.
Yeah.
That the alternative is a game of power. Is power is gonna dominate truth, and like he speaks as if this world was created ex nihilo, like 500 years ago. But Girard, in his critique of Nietzsche, shows us that this comes from the Judeo-Christian revelation. So I think that's the connection there. But it's a great book about how we create knowledge and particularly scientific knowledge. So yeah, it's just the middle of it, and at some point I'll be writing about it as well.
I like that. I'm glad that went in the unexpected direction of talking about what the West has lost sight of, because I was one of those people, and it wasn't until I ended up inhabiting Athens and Jerusalem later in life that I realized just how remarkable some of the cultural advances were because of that Judeo-Christian background, and we are utterly blind to it. I mean, I in the corporate world, you see people talk all the time around business ethics and how ethics are really important, and we just need to act ethically, but no one really knows what they mean. But there's loads of liberal assumptions there. And in my last episode with a friend of mine who's an ethicist, I spoke about how a liberal ethic is ultimately one that's just derived from Christendom. There's an outgrowth of it, but it was the Enlightenment version of just without God. But all of them had been totally influenced by the world of Christendom and the ethic that grew up around what it meant to be equal in the eyes of God and to treat everyone with equal dignity, therefore, and that because of our unique capabilities, that we have a responsibility to care for others and the rest of creation, and to maintain the beauty and fruitfulness and usefulness of everything. And yeah, it has been totally lost. It's become an assumption, and I think we're allowing that ethic to be cannibalized in a way, and it's starting to metamorphosize into other things, which might lead us back to that power game you were talking about. And I think that's the remarkable thing, is that I don't think people realize that that idea of seeing the world, which I think Girard talks about, is Jerusalem inverted the Athenian world. The Athenian world was about it was about developing character, but there was also an idea of strength and power. And clearly we didn't look after the weak and the poor in those times. But then Jerusalem inverted the whole thing and said, no, there's virtue in being normal, and we must recognize people who suffer and are poor and are weak. And that was like the default for human history, the thing that came before that Jerusalem idea. And if we're not careful, we go back there. And I've heard people say, the West might end up just living on in places outside the West because other people have come and tapped into those ideals. They've seen it and gone, whoa, this is rich. Look at that thing. Look at that orchestra that was written on the back of, some liturgical music and flow. And the rest of us are just listening to pop music and rap music, whilst in Asia, like, everyone's majoring on some of those things. So perhaps if the West is in decline, that somewhere along the lines its insights might end up living on elsewhere. But I truly hope we can salvage something from the past, that's for sure.
Well, I want to rebrand it as the Age of Truth rather than the West, because it's more temporal rather than geographical.
That's a good point.
Because the world has unconsciously adopted the mindset of the West, or the Age of Truth, by like democracy, like free enterprise, like science and engineering. These are all based on truth rather than power. So the without knowing it, the world is accepting or adopting the ideas of the West, and but it's gonna. We don't know the future. The future is unwritten. It could revert back to the game of power. And power dominating truth. So it's it's still to be written. And we, in our small parts, we sort of we'll write that.
Yeah, well, that's a good note to finish on. An exhortation, I guess, that we all have a responsibility. We all have decisions in which we can make to make our corner of the world as good as possible, to get it in order. I've really loved this conversation, Kahlil. I'm going to include all of the things we've spoken about in the show notes, including where people can find you. But in case they don't go looking in the show notes, where can people find what you do?
Yeah, just Google my name, Kahlil Corazo. I have a new Substack. Well, the domain is new, explorations.ph. So this current season is like a crossover between Rene Girard and Philippine history and culture. So I'm going deep into that maybe in the next months, possibly years. So those are my main places. In Amazon, you can also find my book, How to Turn Ideas into Reality. So those are, just Google my name and, you'll find me in the internet.
Kahlil, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope we get to do this again, and take good care. Keep fighting the good fight.
And thank you so much, John. This has been an honor to be invited here, and it was a great conversation. I also hope to talk to you again in the future.
Thanks, Kahlil. Take care.